a lot of things that I did ask.
Otherwise, I would just say the station. I was the first.
I didn't forget my time to
Yeah, they just it was a very different time when I was there. It was smoking, but dry, you know, since I chose an AFC, it's expensive. Decent amount of
Yeah, the market.
She's been going out.
I think that job for me.
Basically taking military technology and bringing it well, I mean, with the system, they can go up to 32,000. It's not the planes are already doing that. We're going to replace the current system. It doesn't work. So today, they're limited. You go up and you're limited for how much oxygen.
This is you're going luxury. I do that going.
And delivers it. So you're unlimited. So we're really worried about it.
Like I worry about the guy
300 miles for 5
money.
Yeah.
She'll be a junior. She was already accepted, so we just reapplied for some whatever it is. So she's already in. So I'm going to head out there next week.
We're fairly new. We're actually we're fairly new. We've got it's monumental, but
it's a resort.
It's a complex stuff. That's not for target. Each game assessment. You know what? So yeah, it'll be interesting.
Yeah, I think that's where I like it.
Is that your youngest?
My oldest. I have two. No.
I think we're gonna go Ken.
Yeah, the last one.
Yeah, that's probably good. Yeah, just kind of hang on. So, yeah. So, I pretty much the art.
Okay, sure.
So my daughter just like that. She got it whatever that things are
What time do you start? A little bit after.
But they got so much bad press and bad bullshit that they now are scrambling. Especially when you go to business right, and they're all using their iPad.
It sounds crazy because people realize it's an AR company, AI company. But we have the fintech piece, so actually a mobile wallet function. So we can do what we call loyalty commerce. So we can take things like, we're giving them light AR front end, heavy it's going to let them
No, how you been? Decent, good. Decent.
Yeah,
That's a good answer.
it's like
it's actually you want to make sure all of our customers are like show them
All right.
all that is good.
Yeah, okay.
Job front?
Are you kind of in between?
it's going.
Singapore now. virtual augmented mixed reality.
MR, that's a new one.
I know, that's Microsoft's. They want to call it. Yeah, mixed reality. So,
It's kind of sitting there in your box. Inside the big range, you run like the front so we have that job.
But that,
Part of what
Yeah, just when it snowed so bad that we were there and we were working at pilot cutting. Yeah, so it was a different, it was a different airline too.
Yeah, I've been a friend. He flew, retired, just he flew for United. He would always go to UPS, the only part of the army you can get to, because then you don't have to worry about it. Like, he flew, had an Anchorage, he was coming from Newark, and it was on FedEx had the bunk bed. And so because the flight was too short, the pilot could machine, he got to the bunk bed and sleep on the bed. But now I
It was kind of crazy. I think the airplanes were kind of long distance.
and I really
And then we're all the way over to Columbus. He came out for Christmas. So he had been done, yes, a couple of
You're my back and your podcast.
Of course, you guys, more stuff, a lot of I worked on an oxygen system that goes above and down when it drops crew mass.
we had the first another pilots.
So few female pilots as it is, but wanted to spin around long enough to run the business. To have a son or daughter flying as well. It's pretty impressive.
you got like a file.
She came from,
Send it to me.
Yeah, I'll send it.
Send it to me. You got my email?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sure I do.
really thank you. Flying the helicopter.
Yeah. I'm doing, I'm still doing venture.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming today. We're super happy to have you for Technology, Truth, and Trust. Before we get started, a couple housekeeping items. First of all, the restrooms, you can go out this door or go through the double doors to the left. The code is 7780 if you need to use the restroom at any point. It's right there on the board, and Wi-Fi is available. If you look on the far, I guess you're right there, it's the Heinz conference room, the information there. So if you need a Wi-Fi connection, feel free to gather that as well. My name is Mauricio Uribe. I'm a partner with Knobbe Martens. we're super happy to have you here. This is a great event. It's really the first time we've put together this type of event, so really excited about the opportunity. We have some wonderful guest speakers, which I'll introduce here in just a second. But it really should be a great event for us, and I encourage you in this sense, hopefully you'll have an ability to interact with us, ask a lot of questions, and at the end of the day walk away with some great information and sharing some great experiences. Before we start, just a quick little bit about our firm and then why we're doing this. Knobbe Martens is an intellectual property law firm. That's all we do. I'm based here out of our Seattle office, along with a number of my colleagues here in the room as well, so feel free to introduce yourselves, folks here in the Seattle office. But what topic? Because truth and trust permeates through a lot of different industries and a number of different technologies, and it's a way of stitching them together to say, what if we had an event where the common theme is technology, truth, and trust, and how those issues, and then we can bring in speakers about a number of different technologies, both to learn a little bit about the technology, some perhaps future generation, future development in that technology, and then link them together in terms of what are issues as those are emerging that companies will have with regard to those different technologies. And so that's how this really came together. And so what we'll do is each speaker, we have a number of breaks that we can have some, kind of joint conversation about that. And so that's hopefully how we'll go today. So we'll get a presentation about 15-20 minutes from each speaker. We'll take a short break. We'll gather back together in a panel type discussion. And then we'll be able to really elicit some good questions. We have some preconceived questions, but ultimately have our audience not only ask questions, but share some of their experience as well. Just a bit of level set for our speakers and ourselves. How many of you have a company that has a blockchain type solution, or at least considering blockchain? Anyone? Okay, a couple. How about artificial intelligence? And we'll define what that term means, but define it as you see fit. Who here has any, or pivoting on an AI solution? Okay. VR, virtual reality, augmented reality combination. Okay. Last one that we're going to talk about, logistics. How many of you have to deal with logistics, shipping, delivery, verification along that way? I think that would be probably most everyone. So those are the technology buckets that we're going to be talking about, and we're going to put them all together in issues regarding truth, trust, and technology. So I'll take a moment to introduce, and then I'll finish up with just some comments. First, talking about blockchain will be Ken Moyle. Ken, if you wouldn't mind, raise your hand. Ken's the President and Chief Legal Officer of K6 Partners. He's formerly of DocuSign. K6 Partners, if you don't know, they're a company based here in Seattle, and they focus on digital business consulting and technology, advanced technology for legal services. And so Ken will bring his experiences with regard to that technology and blockchain. Next, we'll have Robert Brown, co-founder and CEO of Meridiun. Meridiun focuses on augmented reality, virtual reality, also fintech and mobile tech, and so building those solutions. And so Robert will be talking to us about from that perspective as well, which I think will be interesting, as well as Ken's. Neil Sahota is formerly of IBM. Neil, if you wouldn't mind raising. Robert, I didn't have you raise your hand. Raise your hand there. Sorry.
I'll do it again.
Neil's a master inventor with IBM and worked for many years developing AI solutions. And so Neil is currently based out of Orange County, and he'll be talking to us from the perspective of AI solutions and the evolution there. As you can see, a lot of these speakers will also have overlap in terms of AI and that. So we've kind of just designated them for that technology, but as you'll see, they'll probably be able to mix quite a lot. And certainly Joe Jacobs, Joe, where are you? Right there. Joe, a 30-year VP, or he's a VP of marketing with UPS, over 30 years with the company. And Joe will be talking to us about logistics and terms and veracity and truth and delivery systems there. So bringing all those folks together, I think we're going to have a wonderful set of individual speakers and hopefully a wonderful panel discussion there. For those of you, just a few quick comments. I don't know if you saw the headlines this week about Facebook and the portal they announced about putting video camera in the home. And what I thought was really interesting, it really lends itself very well to our conversation today, because the headlines were about the technology, but it really was injected with truth and trust issues with that, right? I looked at the headline from Forbes, and I just printed a copy, and it's just interesting that the headline says, Facebook's portal camera, the growing privacy concerns of bringing cameras into our house. And so I find it fascinating that a technology announcement was met by the press, the general press, with issues of truth, privacy issues there, right? It wasn't just like, hey, they announced this. And it's not unique to Facebook, and certainly not picking on them by any means, but just showing you that these issues of truth and trust in technology, as technology is evolving, make its way, and that's a focal point for the press. And so as we've developed this, a number of stories came out. So I just wanted to share just a few scenarios to hopefully make you start thinking about some of the issues, and then our speakers can address that along the way. With regard to artificial intelligence, one of the issues that we'll hopefully be addressing is what happens when you have this wonderful AI algorithm that can take a look at your customer data and label you a good customer or a bad customer. And then you get certain offers along the way. Who decides what's a good customer? And what's the basis of that? Take that to a next level. What happens when that AI algorithm looks at your data, but even the company themselves can't explain how it came up to that solution? So when you have to justify to somebody, this is why you're labeled a great customer and why I'm labeled a terrible customer. How do the companies deal with that veracity? So we'll start talking about issues. That's just AI. Think about from a blockchain. I had a great conversation about how blockchain can enable entire economies based on land plot registration. Well, that's interesting. How's that? Well, because in a lot of countries where there's a lot of falsehood in terms of who owns what piece of property, entire commerce can't happen unless you have the ability to say, I own this property. Otherwise, you're investing a lot of money only to have that property. And because you don't have secure property lending, entire economies can't be built on it. So you've got the chance for, in this case, not bad veracity, but the veracity of being able to say, look, you own this property, you now business can invest in this. Entire economies in third world countries can be built on that. And that's just using something like a distributed ledger technology like blockchain. So you start thinking about, wow, okay, we talk about all these different things, but there's another one. For AI, and I'm trying to touch on everything that will be there. For AI or AR, augmented reality and VX, and Robert, you will explain those terminologies in much greater length today. Think about as you're getting this augmentation in terms of your vision. And not true like VR where you're getting the whole headset and you're immersed, but as you're interacting with this, you might be recommended certain things, right? It's not unheard of that you've got a pair of glasses and as you're walking through the store, you get, hey, you should buy this. Where is that recommendation coming from? Where is that information and who has a bias to that and how is that being processed by you as an individual? Is it my data that's being mined or is it somebody else's data that's being mined? And how is it being presented to me in these type of environments? And I think those all go to issues of truth and trust in that. And certainly with logistics, probably the easy one is organic, certified organic, or I'm paying a premium to get a wine or some beef from a certain farm, and I know that I purchased it from them, but somehow I want to have that veracity that from that place that it went on the loading dock and it arrived in my home. How do I know that it is there and it didn't get substituted? And those are very real issues, not only in the United States, but abroad, in terms of how do we verify that the information you're getting. Now, one thing that I think is interesting, if you happen to get a program today, just by way of a quick exercise, if you look at the third page here, these are some images in your program. And take a look at that and say, how many of these images are real? Take a quick moment, take a look at that. Who thinks at least one of those are real images? Who thinks all of them are real images? Who thinks none of them are real images? And the answer is none. These were all artificially created images. Not a single one was captured in real life. So it's really interesting in terms of our paradigm, in terms of how we're getting information, how we're consuming, and how we react to that technology, especially as this technology evolves and permeates. And so one of the questions we're going to ask is, as each company pivots and starts to incorporate all of these baseline, IoT, artificial intelligence, blockchain, and start to incorporate, we get information. But how do we verify that the information we have is truth, and how do we protect our own information? So those are the kind of things that hopefully we'll have your mind racing right now and throughout the presentation, what we'll talk about. So with that, I encourage you, ask your questions early and often, engage in great discussion. I think we have some great individuals. And so what we're going to do now is we'll start with Ken Moyle, by order of the program. Ken will come up. He's got to just answer his first presentation, and hopefully we'll kick off what will be a very fantastic presentation. So unless you have any questions, enjoy. If everybody has a lunch, if not, feel free. There's water back there, and I look forward to a great conversation. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your participation. And Ken, all you.
Thanks, Mauricio. How's everybody doing today?
Very good.
I saw when Mauricio asked about blockchain, who's thinking about putting blockchain in their business? People are going, maybe, I don't know. That's the typical answer. We're all over the place in terms of blockchain. Everyone's heard of it. How many people know definitively what blockchain is? 4. Great. Let's start with what blockchain is then. And Mark told me not to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway, just because sometimes we need to level set. But I really want to get into what blockchain isn't, why we should use it, some of the issues that we have around trust and truth, and how to apply blockchain to your business. And you may come out of here saying, you know what, blockchain has no place in my business, and that's fine too. That's probably a good place to be if that shoe indeed fits. So let's get to it. What's blockchain? Well, the best way to describe it in one sentence is that it's a continuously growing list of records called blocks, a hash pointer as a link, in other words, to create this chain, and to the previous block, it has a timestamp, it has the data about the transaction. Pretty simple, right? Now, quick, what's the difference between that and a database? Anybody? It really isn't. It is a database. What the great thing about blockchain is, or has been perceived to be, is that it was the basis for creating something called Bitcoin, which I'm sure everybody's heard of. And it was the first blockchain that made a cryptocurrency viable, made it real. It was able to solve something called the double spend problem, creating a ledger whereby you could verify that if you're going to spend a currency and you're going to receive a currency, that both people are able to do that, both parties are able to do that, that currency exists on one hand, and that transaction can be verified. That is a blockchain has been pretty much the only way to do that, which is why we tend to tie cryptocurrency and blockchain together. They're not the same. I'm not going to go too much into that. We don't want to talk about crypto today. No one, I think, is interested in crypto speculation or creating their own coin today, I hope. But that was how blockchain got started. The difference between a database, as we understand a database, and a blockchain is, I think, pretty simply defined right here. When we have a typical database, it's controlled by somebody. Someone has the data. Somebody gives you and me permission to access that data, either view it, add to it, update it, what have you. It's what we call a centralized system, right? I have my ability to access that data in a particular way that's dictated by somebody. In a decentralized system, there's actually many sets of the same database that are all viewable and verifiable by many different parties. In a blockchain, what? Move in. Oh, am I out of camera? Okay. In a blockchain scenario, there's actually not one database. There's actually hundreds, thousands, millions in some cases, copies of that database that are all updated more or less simultaneously by all those folks in the network. Those are called nodes. Question: if you own Bitcoin, if you have a node, are you updating Bitcoin? No, you're not. But there are members of the Bitcoin community that are updating those databases. through a consensus mechanism, which we'll talk about in a second. So when we have this scenario here, we have a relationship with this person or this body, and we know who that is. That's a trusted entity, right? These people down here, these clients and users, are given permission based upon trust and identity. What about here? Not necessarily, right? In fact, in a proof of work type of database or blockchain, the blockchain is actually updated by folks that you've never met, that you don't know, who actually you don't have any trust relationship with whatsoever, right? So how do we make that work? Well, through something called consensus. Consensus is really the mechanism by which these transactions that are added to the blockchain are actually added. And how do we do that? How do we solve this problem of having no trust between parties, no ownership of the database, and no way to actually verify that what's going into the database is true? Well, this is often been demonstrated by the Byzantine kingdom problem. Anyone heard of the Byzantine problem? So if I'm trying to attack on a castle, and I'm a Byzantine king, and I've got several armies around this castle, hundreds of miles apart, and I need to attack this castle, and the only way to defeat this castle, which is heavily armed, is to attack all at once. I've got several armies, no way to communicate, I've got no telephones. I need to be able to communicate with all those armies to attack, when to attack. On Thursday, I got one army across the way who says, no, if those messages break down, there is no truth anymore. I can't actually verify what's true, what's accurate, whether there's been a spy. Nobody else is there, I get killed, nothing works. So this Byzantine problem is what the blockchain and these consensus mechanisms are actually set up to fix. In the Bitcoin scenario, and I use Bitcoin blockchain because it's the one everybody knows the best, it's called proof of work. Proof of work. How many people are familiar with proof of work? Okay. In order to be a node on a network, I have to be able to prove that I have solved a puzzle in order to add the next set of transactions to the blockchain and get my reward as a miner. Okay. The best way to understand that is that we've got a bunch of transactions. We've got a bunch of transactions that are needed to be added to the blockchain. How do we incent people to add them to the blockchain? We reward them. How do we reward them? We reward them with Bitcoin. How do they get their Bitcoin? They need to solve a puzzle, a problem that is very difficult to solve. It takes a lot of computing power. It takes a ton of computing power. In fact, it takes infinitely more computing power as the blockchain gets bigger with Bitcoin. You've probably heard that it takes as much power as the whole country of Ireland generates in order to solve one problem now on the blockchain. Sorry, Mark. So in order to basically get my credit and get my reward, I need to be able to solve this puzzle. This puzzle is it's hard for me to solve, but it's easy to prove that I solved it. The puzzle's been solved. Added my transactions to the chain, or tried to, and at the same time someone else has solved the puzzle, and they get added to the chain first. I try to add mine to the chain. He adds his to the chain. Whoever actually gets added first, that's the longest chain that creates what's true. Now, those sets of transactions that got added to the chain, does anyone verify that those are true? Or do we just know that that set of transactions is a part of the chain now? Hard to understand, but the fact of the matter is that the garbage that goes into a set of transactions can be garbage still, and it becomes part of a chain, and this chain becomes the truth, and it's immutable. It's an immutable record that you can't undo. It doesn't say that it's true. Everybody comfortable with blockchain now? All right, great. Blockchain's not the solution to everything. And some of you probably are thinking right now, well, it's probably not the solution to anything. It's not limited to cryptocurrency though, and it's not limited to the Bitcoin blockchain. How many of you have heard of permissioned blockchains? Permissioned blockchains are for private blockchains. This is actually probably where most of the business value is going to come from, where we have a situation more like this, where there's this whole group now becomes this ecosystem and it stops there. So there's not people that you don't know or you don't trust that are part of it. They're all permissioned, but they're all permissioned to do this. Does that make sense? Does that make you feel better? Makes me feel better. So you'll see when you talk about the permissioned blockchain, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about folks that don't participate unless they're allowed to participate. And that makes a lot of sense if we're talking about an ecosystem where all the parties actually have something to benefit from a particular set of transactions and the accuracy of a ledger. Because blockchain is very cool at being able to create an immutable record and create a set of circumstances where everybody can agree and see what the truth actually is, as long as they have faith that that actually is the truth. Blockchain is not anonymous. A lot of people think it is. It's not, although it is basically a set of transactions, and those transactions don't necessarily have to equate to people. It's not fast. And it's really not scalable, as we found with Bitcoin. So those are some definite, drawbacks of blockchain. So why would I use it? Well, if you think about how much money is being put to create trust or to prevent untrusted actors from wreaking havoc in our own ecosystems now, you realize that you don't have a perfect trust environment now, right? I mean, we spend so much money on NDAs and cybersecurity, on AML, KYC, physical security, background checks, identity verification, authentication. These things are all costs. And when we do this with our own employees, we do it between different businesses. And we have, if you go in, how many people have bought a house? Mortgage. Have you gone to do your closing at a title company? What does a title company do? Besides take fees.
Makes you sign a lot of papers.
They make you sign a lot of papers. A lot of times they have paneled offices, right, to make you trust that they do something called escrow, right? Some trusted party has to be licensed and bonded to hold your money for you. You're doing this conveyance through agents. These agents are licensed, bonded. They're recognized by the state as being allowed to do what they do. So you've got your closing, you've got your mortgage, you've got your disclosures, you've got all these massive amounts of window dressing around your big banks with their paneled offices and their large buildings to give you trust that they're going to be there to actually give you the money that you are actually asking for. Tons of money goes into trust. Tons of money goes into creating a picture of trust, and also to create a confidence that you have as a consumer that the folks you're dealing with are actually legitimate. The cost of inaccuracy and error. Now we talked about garbage in and garbage out, but if you are actually thinking about the fact that everybody in an ecosystem, whether horizontally or vertically, has their own copy of a ledger to follow and track transactions. Everybody has their own ledger. Everybody keeps that ledger secretly. They protect that ledger. Those ledgers don't necessarily all line up. There's certain things I can't see about what you have. If you want to give me a statement, I know that you think I owe you this much money. But I don't know where you got that information. I don't know what you're paying your vendors. I don't know where your suppliers got what they're supplying you. There's a lot of things that I don't know, I can't see. Because of that, there's a lot of errors that take place and a lot of mystery. If I've got to pay my own accounting department, my own infrastructure to keep secret and keep tabs on all of my information, everybody else is doing the same thing. We're all protecting it from each other. There's a possibility that you can, if you've got a more open ledger system, that you can all benefit from it in seeing what you need to see, not seeing what you shouldn't see, but at least it's all continuously updated and accurate and perceived by everybody to be fair. No more disputes, no more costs of inaccurate information, ostensibly. And you've got this immutable record, which of course blockchain is all about, right? You can't change it. Once it's done, it's a write-only database. And if you can agree on what that consensus mechanism is, and this is the big one, if you can all agree that the way we're going to update this database is blank, stack hands on it, then all of those costs associated with trust, all those costs associated with bad information, they are substantially reduced. And you have an immutable record. An ecosystem. This is an ecosystem under which a blockchain or distributed ledger could thrive and could help everybody involved keep track of the source of tuna, what we call provenance, and also to regulate that particular provenance through oversight from regulators. All of these transactions, these are all transactions, by the way. Every red arrow is a transaction. Imagine if you had a ledger that could keep track of all these transactions and that everybody could see. These transactions don't necessarily have to involve money. They can involve movement from place to place, a logistical type of, which you'll hear about later on. And this is the type of situation. And by the way, this is an ecosystem. It's not one company, right? And I would argue that one company within this ecosystem, if they have their own blockchain, I question the value of whether that actually makes sense. The blockchain, the key to making it valuable is to have it work within an entire ecosystem. And again, the challenge now is, how do we all decide what the consensus mechanism is for updating a database that we can all see and all interact with? Here's a more horizontal. And this is actually a token offering here, where in the pharma industry, we've got folks throughout the supply chain all updating a digital ledger for control of drugs. One thing that's not here is a regulator, which would be very beneficial as well. What it's not for, again, this is my opinion. Internal use. I don't know that a blockchain can help you internally at all. Just use a database. You've got a controlled you own the database, you own the system, you own access to it. Do you need to have a distributed ledger outside of the context of an ecosystem? Storing confidential information. It's not the best way to do that because of how open a distributed ledger is. So trade secrets and things like that probably don't belong there. And there's an argument that says that, in a permissioned database, in a permissioned blockchain, do you want to have your end users know what your suppliers charge you for a particular thing that you're reselling? Well, of course you don't. So that's something that's maybe outside of the chain. But these types of things are all the way you would want to set this up so that you don't have information you don't want shared outside of your particular entity on the blockchain. Storing large quantities of data, very inefficient for that. There's no point in storing large chunks of information in there. In fact, blockchain just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and so the best thing to do with a blockchain storing data is storing only the information about the transaction that is relevant, and usually you want that to be a hash of information to keep that database small. And we still haven't figured out a way, although it may be coming, to process massive amounts of data in very fast time. Anybody know how long a Bitcoin transaction takes? A Bitcoin transaction usually cannot take any less than 10 minutes. So imagine a Visa transaction taking 10 minutes. Very a lot of unhappy customers on the lines at the checkout booth. Innovation is not the same as automation. Just want to leave you with that. I am rubbing up against my time, but the thing to remember with implementing a blockchain solution is that you're not basically taking a current process and paving it down that and really just automating it. You're pulling it up by the roots and you're replacing it with something. That's innovation, and it takes a lot of guts. Here's an example of a blockchain solution. I'm not going to mention whose it is, but taking that mortgage or real estate transaction we just talked about. Well, what we have here is someone inserting a blockchain in the middle of a bunch of transactions and a bunch of middlemen and adding another process to it. How is that helping? Not likely it is helping, and it's not going to be very successful, right? Because it's not actually taking all of these players and putting them in, reordering them and maybe eliminating some of them, versus just adding more process, more middlemen, right? One of the really tough things about blockchain implementation is that blockchain vendors, and I don't really know if that's even a word, but blockchain vendors are offering you to an opportunity to eliminate a middleman, because that's what blockchain is supposed to do. It's supposed to kind of eliminate all of these extra processes, all this window dressing. They have to insert themselves somewhere into there and become middlemen themselves. So it's a challenge, and this is why we have a very interesting paradigm in the blockchain industry. Mark's stop just giving up on me, right? I'm just watching. I want people to see the slides, Mark. So here's a decision path, and we'll give you a copy of this, but if you want to take a snap of it. I really like this one. This is basically, for a business decision maker, really a reality check on whether blockchain makes sense for you or not. Do you need a shared or common database? Are there multiple parties involved? Are parties involved have conflicting incentives and or are not trusted? All of these things make sense in a blockchain environment. We just talked about that. But you can see that and public transactions versus privates. We've got a permission database for you over here. And that's a big question, right? Do you want your transactions to be public if you're a bank? Probably not. Implementing a blockchain solution. I don't know how much time I have, Mark. I think you're getting close. Getting close? Okay. Just a couple of things I wanted to point out here. And maybe we'll stop even here, because you need to be able to influence your ecosystem before you can start. If you're not in a position to take that big tuna ecosystem that we just saw and influence it, you're probably not going to be successful without creating more of a consortium approach. Or if you're a member of a consortium, and try to push it from within that. Are the members of the network ready and willing to adapt? In other words, if you come up with the idea as a food processor, are the fishermen going to be interested in what you have to propose? Are the regulators going to be interested? Are the restaurants going to be interested? And is the status quo already ready to be disrupted? Because it will be, and it must be. In order for this to work, everyone has to decide that, you know what, it's time to change. The electronic mortgage has been a practical possibility for the last 20 years. Anybody done an electronic mortgage? And the reason is because there are so many people in that ecosystem all saying that they want to do it, but all saying, well, but these guys are slowing us down. And ultimately, there's just questions of change, of cost, of switching over. They're paying, of taking a process that's many decades old and pulling it up by the roots and replacing it, and realizing that there's going to be a period where you have to do things both ways, which is going to double your costs at least. These things are all realities, and these are why you have issues with implementing blockchain solutions across ecosystems. We haven't really had one yet. Can anyone think of an ecosystem that's been totally disrupted and replaced with blockchain? Other than cryptocurrency? No. So the vital resources for you, and I'll probably leave it here, is your technology partners, legal and policy advisors, and ultimately, tops is your stakeholders. It's not just internal. It has to be a group effort. If you're regulated, definitely need the input from regulators. The trade associations across the ecosystem are really important, and everybody in the supply chain needs to be part of it. That's the way you end up with your, it's the only way you're going to be able to develop a trusted approach that people are going to embrace rather than reject, is coming up with it all together and create that trusted environment. So I think it will be, actually, do we have questions now, Mark?
Quick question, sure.
Yeah.
Just do that.
Okay. Quick questions?
Wild question. So I'm a consumer. Can I use blockchain to control my data in all the companies that I interact with on my credit card, my bank, so that I have a blockchain that says they'll dump my data into a place where I have access to everything about me, Google, Facebook, etc.
It's a good question. There are many companies that are approaching and trying to tackle the identity problem. Online identity is becoming a big deal because the way social media has really capitalized on our personal information. The fact that we still can't do electronic mortgage because of the online identity issues. We in this country especially have made it very, very easy to do online transactions, and by doing so, we've made it friction-free. And that means that a lot of folks are absorbing the risk of misidentification. But on the flip side, we're also, as consumers, giving our information away by the bags full.
Yeah.
That's being monetized by folks other than us. And there's kind of an ecosystem whereby you can tokenize and monetize your own identity. That I'll just stop it there. But that is it's a big problem, a big issue, and one that there are many companies trying to address.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Wrap it up? Okay. Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you, Ken.
Thank you.
So next up, we'll have Robert. Thank you, Robert.
Okay, thanks guys. Again, my name is Robert Brown. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Meridiun. And what I wanted to do is, and Mark will probably throw something at me as well too, is maybe help explain subtly some of these terms we keep hearing: AR, VR, XR, MMR, all these different terms and what they mean, because in reality, they fundamentally all do the same thing, but they do it on different devices with different circumstances and outputs. And that's important to understand if you're considering this type of soundbite technology, if you will, for your company. So what I wanted to do is, before I jump into sort of some of these explanations, everybody have a cell phone on them? Okay. You use it regularly, right? And we talk about things like truth and trust. Why do you use your phone? The point is, we have applications on our phone. We access information on that phone. We make communications, we do things, we use these fundamental apps. But in reality, we have faith in that device and that information of what we're sort of engaging that device with. Does that make sense? So at a point, we're sort of relying on the functionality of the technology and the access to the information to give us the ability either to make a decision. Now, if you're talking to your wife, you probably know it's your wife or your husband. So there isn't necessarily the faith of saying, well, is that really you? But in some of those cases where we look at some of those photos, there are situations where people are getting robocalls saying it's the IRS, right? So there's all this sort of information on these devices that we are engaging. And so, Mark, maybe the next part of this series is a discussion on faith in technology rather than the sort of the analytic side of truth and trust. So one of the things that's interesting about augmented reality, as an example, is we can use more raw technology to better understand and have faith in the result of what we're looking at. So on phones today, we have Siri. I argue with Siri all the time because it never understands what the hell I'm doing. My fingers are fat, so sometimes what I cue in and what I try and get back, I get frustrated, okay? Or I use an application, or I go to a website and I try and find information about that particular sort of product or location or what's in front of me. But what if we could use that phone, and simply by taking that phone and a camera and holding it up to what we see, it recognizes the object, and in turn that object comes back and explains itself to us. That's a pretty profound capability in terms of consumer behavior, consumer applications, but also worker-based applications. So augmented reality is that technology. It's the overlay of digital content on top of the physical world. So effectively, we're taking our eye, and the eye that is on our device, and giving you the ability to recognize that. But many people think that AR is just optical. Everybody familiar with Shazam? Hear a song that comes on? Shazam is augmented reality. Why? Because we're using a machine to recognize a current state, a song we hear. We're doing a spectral analysis of that song and coming back and telling you by looking at a database. Okay, that's the Doors. So augmented reality isn't just optical. Augmented reality can also be behavioral. The things that I'm doing in navigating through a location with a device that's in my pocket, if I choose to opt in with an application, it can actually understand what I'm doing and a profile that I have and come back through, whether it be a haptic response, whether it be a voice response, something that says, hey, what you're doing is this, would you like that? So the reason why it's important is that with as many devices are in the world that are smart, about 2.2 billion today, there's an incredible opportunity for businesses to adopt augmented reality, provided that they understand what's the ROI, what's the benefit, how do I actually implement this thing? Because it sounds like it involves a device, it involves content, and it involves circumstance and use cases that people need to understand, okay? So I just want to frame that for just a second, okay? Now, with your device, do you trust your device? Yeah, it's your phone, and if it's like your kids, it never leaves your hand, so you're always trusting it, right? So that's an important consideration because of the scale of the particular device in the world, okay? So Oculus, some of these other devices, you see people putting these things on their face and they're kind of standing like zombies, kind of moving around, okay? Well, unfortunately, there's only about 5 million of those devices that were shipped this year. And most of them are sitting on people's shelves, and like in my house, we have 3 different versions of that device that people don't use. And unfortunately, okay, this has become kind of a device that's probably more relegated for an entertainment type of situation, because I can't necessarily walk around unless I put a face mask on or pads, because I'm going to bump into things. So it's typically a controlled use type of device. But this is an opportunity where this type of technology can take you to a location and you can engage that situation, okay? But with respect to that information, is that information trusted? It may be more entertainment based, but does entertainment need to be trusted? I don't know, maybe not. The point is that the market is trying to find itself with respect to what's the real use case of VR versus AR, okay? There's also, not to kick the VR guys in the shin, but have you ever used a VR headset? What happens after about an hour? You gotta go do timeout because you're seasick? Well, the very reason why you get seasick is the very reason why VR has a limited use case in terms of business. After about an hour and a half, most human beings get seasick because you can't see the horizon because the real world is not in front of you. It's all virtual. So things like gesturing where you can see your hands help overcome that. But if you're going to put it in practical use inside of a business, having a worker work for an hour and a half and then go to a safe room to detox so he doesn't throw up on you, okay, is a little bit of a problem. Not to say that it doesn't have applications, but what we're trying to do is to point out the reality, okay? So you trust the technology rather than the hype where you kind of go, yeah, I have faith in the technology, but it didn't work. So that's the point of pointing this out. We also hear this term called extended reality, which is, wow, this is going to be a hybrid. So I'm looking at something, is it real or is it virtual? So this is actually a sort of a cross-pollination of physical, of digital, on top of the physical and digital overlay on the physical world. Does that make sense? So in many cases, you may see things that are in front of you that aren't there. Okay? Now, this is probably one of those concepts where, again, as we move forward and we embrace AR and VR in terms of real practical applications, and we have trust as well as faith in those technologies, the marketplace will begin to evolve into new use cases and begin to explain more about what else is possible on top of this technology. Okay? Make sense? Okay. One of the things that most people say when they talk to us, because we do provide augmented reality core technology to companies, is they say, I get what it does. How do I make money with it? How does it solve a fundamental problem inside of my business? How can I utilize it to reduce the cost, increase efficiency, increase engagement, transfer of information from the company to a knowledge worker, all of those things. Well, AR started its life really as a technology that you have a marker and you have a camera. One recognizes the other and pulls a piece of information. Well, that's great, but who's going to create all that digital content? A different set of knowledge workers inside the business? Or can I use it, which is the number one question when companies ask us, how do I implement it into what do I have and what I have? Walmart, which is one of our customers, says, I have 2 million SKUs. How do I create experiences around 2 million SKUs that change on a daily basis? Who's going to do that? Do I hire 10,000 digital engineers? No way. So these are things, these are relevant questions where people say, can I take the existing digital content I have, overlay it on top of the physical space? I get the philosophy of doing that. But is there anything else that I need in order to make that happen? And this is where other technologies like AI, natural language processing, other technologies actually further enable this and actually allow that extended reality conversation to really happen. Because now what I can do is use a class of mobile devices with relevancy technology to actually make I don't need more content as a user. I need less content. I need less things to do. I need more relevancy to what I want and what I do. And this is where the crossover of some of these other technologies that you see here, along with AR, really is a presentation layer, give you a new ability to understand the things in front of you. Make sense? Okay. So, I'll have to mark up, put the plug in here. So what does that mean? So tell me what that specifically means. So our company, this is exactly what we do. We started life sort of on this side of the fence where we recognize that augmented reality on a mobile device requires an application. There is a set of optical technologies called OpenCV, Open Computer Vision, that recognizes a marker that goes and gets you information. But if what we said is we can't necessarily scale the ability to create all that digital content, and we have to make it relevant to the business, I need these other pieces, so how does that work? So what we provide is sort of this set of technologies that create presentation, create relevancy, simplify the ability to find what I want, because again, AR doesn't have to be just I hold my phone up to something. What if I walk into a Target and I look at somebody in a red vest and I go, where's that chicken soup that's got the blue can? Could AR be useful in determining what that means? Absolutely. Because what I can do now is I can access the data. I can put it through an engine and I can put it into a voice interface. You know, you may be thinking Siri. Siri is a search engine. It's going to look for everything. This allows you to specifically look into the data and create meta relationships within the data that AR can then present, where you say, where's the chicken soup in the blue can? You mean Progresso soup? It's located on aisle 12. Here's the location, follow the arrow on the ground. What's the alternative for us as consumers? Ask somebody in the red vest. For the business, is that scaled? No. But imagine now, we all carry that phone, the device we trust. And now companies are realizing the device can be the person in the red vest. Not to put the red vest out of business or out of a job, but because we rely more on this necessarily than them, because we trust this. Maybe I don't trust them. Maybe Aunt Jenny was selling lawn furniture that someplace else the week before. How do I know she knows about the product? Well, this is where businesses say, I know every product in my store. I know the relationship of every single feature and function of that product. And if I could connect it to a very simple interface with the technologies that make it relevant and present it as an augmented experience on top of a reality state, would that be compelling for my business? So this is exactly where we're focused, not necessarily because AR is a shiny object on the wall. We're going to go, hey, AR, you mean accounts receivable or Arkansas? Actually, I had a customer say that. What are you doing in accounts receivable? It's augmented reality, sir. Let me show you what it means. Okay. So this is where we've gone off and built this platform. But one of the other things to consider, if this is really about sort of engaging people with content and information on trusted devices, okay, shouldn't you give people the ability to also monetize that? So things like a mobile payment. Could I engage somebody with something and then right that same time say, but also now monetize that? And again, can we do that in VR? Absolutely. But we're in a controlled sort of fixed setting versus a highly mobile setting. So this is really what the XR experience is about in terms of the core technology, and how Meridiun as a company is focused on that and pushing customers to understand these are the real use cases of the technology. Certainly buy our stuff, but our responsibility as sort of a corporate citizen is we need to sort of demystify the business, because so much of the business has been about hype, okay, and not truth and trust in the technology, because nobody knows what the hell to do with the technology. They see what it does, but how many more things am I going to sell? This is what's important in sort of understanding what AR does. So let's talk about real world use cases. Are there any companies using this? This is a little customer of ours. Okay. They have a business use case. They have 400 customer service people specifically to answer questions, not on what TV to buy or what shoe to buy, but on HR questions for the 3.5 million associates. 400 people who sit on a call center and answer Jimmy's question, you can take 2 days off next week on your PTO. Why? Because as humans, we're all lazy, okay? There are things that we know we can do just because I can pick up the phone and I can talk to someone, right? So in this situation, they use the technology in a very simple manner where they put an infographic up on the wall of the break room where all the other HR information, safety, legality information all sits. The place you go to find the information. But they also use an application, and this is actually the application, where if you want to know how many days you can take off, you take your phone, walk up to the wall, and the phone logs you into their HR system and pulls your profile and tells you what you want to do. So what does it do? It reduces the costs of the 400-person call center, okay? But creates a whole new way for their associates to engage the information. And oh, by the way, that's very trusted content, and the people that would normally go to get the information, they're very, very trusted people. So this is a dynamic where they've used this particular type of technology to be able to understand and simplify issues within their business. Make sense? Okay? Another one. So I mentioned earlier about walking into a store and trying to find something. So as consumers, we've all gone to a store. First thing we do is go, where the hell do I find the chainsaws? Okay? You may or may not know where they are. You may wander the aisles. But there's a general problem of people want to know where something is. Is it my best option? Okay? And I want to buy it. Back is the guy in the red vest. He may or may not know everything about the product in the store. Okay? But what Tractor Supply wants him to do is know everything about something in the store. It's impossible. There's no way for him to do that. So they recognize that they can use the technology to create something like a greeting of saying, Robert, welcome back to Tractor Supply. It knows your previous history. And you can ask the question and say, where do I find chainsaws? I have to cut down a tree. And then it will guide you to the product location in the store using basically a wayfinding function. As you walk up to the product, this is where, again, Tractor Supply looks at this and says, this changes the way we do business because they have a small footprint store, but they have a function called endless aisle. So they only carry 3 chainsaws in the store, but 13 more are available online. Is that a disconnect in the sales process? Yes. But what they can do is combine those two together using this technology. Where now the person can say, they can hold their phone up to the 3 chainsaws, but know 6 more are available that can be drop shipped to their home the very next day. The same e-commerce process they rely on from Amazon. So this is where AR gives you the ability, not just, again, recognizing an object, but recognizing the object to give you options and tying in information that better explain a state inside of this store without having to ask somebody in a vest. Or you sitting there going, God, I don't know what to do, I'm out of here. Bye. Interesting fact today. Half of all retail sales in the US this year, about $2.7 trillion, is on the basis of somebody standing in a store on their phone, browsing a website to make a decision about a product that doesn't involve the retailer that they're standing inside. That data points from Google and Gartner, just so you know I'm not BSing. Okay, so that's the truth and trusted. So that's a very significant thing. They're not in control of what their consumers are doing. This gives them that control with this technology. Make sense? Okay, and here's kind of a situation of maybe semi-trusted content. Is it marketing content or is it the real manufacturer's information that I'm looking at? And yeah, fairly trusted people because I want to know that John standing there is giving me the right information about the product that's in front of me. Again, this is what we believe augmented reality, virtual reality, extended reality is. Not the shiny object, but the practical application with a set of other technologies that give you the ability to... Have you ever opened it? Some people, you're probably very trustworthy guy, I'm sure you've read it back to back. The point is, most people kind of go like this, right? And they say, well, I'm never going to use it. But here's the reality of the vehicles. We jump in, we got the new car smell, that's all great. But do we understand everything that we're seeing? All the features of the car that we had to have. How many of you actually used all those features? Probably not the full 100%. The point is when something goes wrong or you don't know how to use something, we now jump to a manual and go, what's the blue button? Flip to the index and try and understand it. Well now, Ford says, you don't have to do that anymore because the manual's in your phone. So when you don't know how to use something, hold the phone up to the dash will explain itself to you. You don't have to figure out what the blue button means because there's 7 sections of blue buttons on the back of the index. Okay? But they've also said this can actually change the way we sell a car. We talk about trusted people and trusted content. How many trust a salesperson inside of an automotive dealership? Not many, right? It's the 3rd most stressful experience a human goes through behind marriage and childbirth. True story, or true fact. So when you walk in, this is the reason why when you don't trust the person who's standing in front of you, 96% of all automotive purchases involve internet research because you want to go to a place and find the information. So now imagine walking in, little upstream of this sort of user manual, okay, And on your phone, you could hold your phone up to that Lincoln, and the Lincoln begins to explain the features. What's the alternative? Jimmy in the white shoes is going to do it for you? Do you trust what he's going to say? And from Ford's perspective, that's the delivery of a pure marketing message, because you've played the game of telephone where you whisper in somebody's ear and it kind of goes around and comes back to you, and it's a little different than what was said. Okay, in this case, Ford can deliver the same marketing message every single time to let you know that the reason why you want to buy the EcoBoost vehicle is because of the following value proposition. Not relying on Jimmy to deliver it, but relying on the technology. So this is the actual application, the actual user manual, holding it up to the dash that points out the features, and you can drill into it. Pulling up videos, pulling up audio. How many times has an engine light come on inside of your car? What's the first thing you do? It's going to explode. So you pull over, right? Or you call somebody.